because once upon a time means something wonderful is about to happen. Storytelling is an adventure into the whole of civilization, into how people lived, what they believed in, what are the values that they lived by, how they managed to hold civilizations together, and how those were passed on. Storytelling for me conjures up memories and images of grandparents and grandchildren lovingly sharing personal stories, stories about the animal world. And I personally tell stories because I was raised on stories. My parents, who were country people and who were thought not to be educated, had a wealth of education and knowledge that they gained from their relationship with the environment. Today we have a word for that. We call it indigenous knowledge. And they spoke to us always in stories before I knew that there was something called stories. And the stories they've told have a tremendous impact on me. And then I've come to realize how much of our values and history reside in our stories. As a matter of fact, there's a Dutch Guyanese man, Ivan van Sertima, who wrote a book chronicling the journeys of the Africans before Columbus came, and that book is called They Came Before Columbus. And a great deal of what he discovered through the oral tradition of Latin America, where he did his research. So that's very important to me. And then I take to heart something said by a Nigerian writer, historian, philosopher, Chinwe Achebe, that the stories are our guides. Without them, we're like blind beggars stumbling in the dark. One of my favorite economists, philosophers from India, is a young lady whose name is Arundhati Roy. And she has a book with a concept about talking back to the empire. And for people who were colonized, very often all we have is our culture and our heritage. It's the only way, one of the few ways we have to cope with all the negative impacts of globalization. So I hope that in my stories we hear the voices of the oppressed. I also hope that in my stories we hear the voices of hope. Because we, in spite of how difficult life can be, we fall in love. We have children. We look at the moon. We hope that Australia will respond, be restored. So I hope we hear those voices as well. I hope we hear the voices of women. The voices of women who know they are powerful, and the voices of women who have lost contact with their power. And we help to restore that. And I hope we hear the voices of children. Stories are for the young and for the young at heart. And I think sometimes adults forget to just stand and wonder and say what if and why. So I hope we hear all of those voices in my stories. I hope we hear the voices of West Africa. I'm tempted to say Africa, but Africa is a whole continent. And the Jamaican people who were enslaved came from West Africa. And that's where our story tradition comes from. And when I tell stories, I try to be true to what I understand that tradition was all about, and perhaps still is all about. That's a very important question. What can we learn through my stories? What can we learn through storytelling in general? Storytelling is a way to help us to travel. Storytelling is a way for us to connect to the common values of humanity. So the details might change, but all of us have certain things that we hold dear. All of us have certain aspirations for our lives. All of us have certain challenges that we have to overcome. And so I hope that we see that as one of the primary values of storytelling, that we could sit in Jamaica and learn some stories from Finland and vice versa. On this trip, I consider myself so lucky that the things I've read about, the little things, not a lot, I've read about and heard about Finland, I'm able to see it in a real way. And I'm so excited that there are traditional stories from your country that I haven't yet heard and that I'm hoping to take away with me and have a different perspective of this country and this region. For example, I know so little about the Sami people. And so I'm looking to see what I can discover about them in your stories.